I finished the notebook, or at least I thought I was going to. By then, I was reading slowly, deliberately, the way you read something you don't want to end and don't want to continue at the same time. And the story, it had been building towards something. You could feel it, like weather gathering before it breaks. Everything in it was leading somewhere. And then, mid-sentence, mid-word, the ink stopped. Just stopped. Not at the end of a chapter, not at a pause, in the middle of a thought. The protagonist was standing at a threshold, a door, a decision, and the story ended. Like the person writing it had stood up and walked away and never came back. I turned the page, and then the next, and the next. 6 pages, 7, 8, all blank, white, waiting. I sat there holding the notebook for a long time, and I felt something I don't quite have a word for. It was close to grief, the kind of grief you feel when a story refuses to tell you how it ends. But underneath that, there was something else. Pressure. The kind of pressure that comes when something is being asked of you and you've run out of excuses. Because the story hadn't really ended. It had stopped at the exact moment the choice became mine. The threshold in the story wasn't abstract. It was a decision. To stop performing the smaller life. To stop waiting for permission, for safety, for certainty, for the moment when it finally feels easy enough to begin. To accept that it was never going to feel easy, that it would always feel like this, terrifying, uncertain, exposed, and to do it anyway. And I was there, not metaphorically, in my actual life, at the edge of that exact same decision. The conversation I avoided, the work I never started, the life I kept calling eventually. I closed the notebook. I set it on the table. I stood up and walked to the window, and I looked out at the street, ordinary, lit up, moving. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding from the beginning. If I already know how this ends, if I do nothing, if I've seen the shape of the life waiting for me on the other side of more of the same, then what exactly am I protecting? I didn't answer it that night, but I couldn't unfeel it. And some questions, once you ask them honestly, don't need answers. They do the work on their own. I want to tell you I found them. I want to give you the clean, satisfying version. Stranger tracked down, confronted in a cafe, explanation delivered, mystery solved. But I've been committed to telling you the truth, so here is the truth. I never found them. And I think that's the point. I kept searching for another week. Not obsessively, or maybe obsessively, but in a way I could disguise as reasonable. And in that week, while I was searching, something happened that matters more than any answer the stranger could have given me. I started writing. Not the notebook, my own journal, something I hadn't touched in 9 years, a habit I'd let go of in the same slow drift that I'd let go of everything else. I started writing about the morning before the stranger, and then the morning of, and then all the mornings going back further than that. I wrote about the horse drawing. I wrote about Daniel. I wrote about the plans I'd made and quietly retired. I wrote without editing, without making myself look better, without the long practiced habit of managing my own narrative. And somewhere in that writing, maybe on the fourth night, maybe the fifth, I realized something that stopped me mid-sentence. The notebook knew things that only I could know. Not almost only I could know, only I could know. The specific memory of the classroom, the specific texture of that November night with Daniel, the specific internal language of my retreats, the precise phrasing of the justifications I made to myself in the privacy of my own mind when I was choosing the smaller thing. No one had access to that. Not anyone I'd told because I hadn't told anyone. Not anyone observing me because the most crucial parts had never been visible. The notebook wasn't reporting my behavior from the outside. It was reporting my interior. There is only one place a story like that to come from, and it was the same place I'd been running from for years. I sat with this for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I have a neat explanation for the mechanics of it, how a stranger could be the vehicle for something that originated somewhere so private. I don't have that explanation. I'm not sure one exists or that it matters. What I do believe is this. There is a version of yourself you keep alive in the place you don't talk about, the place underneath the performance of the manageable life. And that version doesn't forget the things you've decided to forget. It holds everything: the classroom, the November night, the phone calls you didn't make, the drawings you'd stopped drawing. It holds all of it, faithfully, waiting. The stranger was a messenger, maybe the only kind that could have gotten through to me, because every message I'd been sending myself for years, I'd been intercepting and rerouting. Something external had to carry it, something I couldn't immediately dismiss, couldn't file away, couldn't reduce to just the sound of my own voice telling me things I'd trained myself not to hear. The stranger gave me a story, and the story was mine from the beginning. I just needed someone else to hold it up so I could finally see it clearly. The night I decided to write the ending, I sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes before I opened the notebook. I sat with the fear first. I think that was important, not trying to bypass it, not telling myself it was irrational, not waiting for it to pass. It wasn't irrational. It was the most rational thing I'd felt in years. The fear was completely justified. I was about to make choices that would cost me the safety of the life I'd built. And safety, even when it's a cage, is still something real that you lose when you leave it. I sat with the fear. And then, when I was ready, I opened the notebook to the blank pages. I picked up a pen, a specific pen, one I'd owned for years and never used for anything important, which felt right, and I wrote. Here is what I wrote. I want to be precise because vagueness would be a betrayal of everything the notebook was trying to tell me. I wrote that I was going to message Daniel, not a long message, not a flood of explanation and apology designed to make myself feel better, a short one, honest one. I should have been there. I wasn't. I'm sorry. I'd like to talk if you ever want to. I didn't know if he'd respond. I knew I needed to send it regardless because the debt of honesty is owed whether or not it's received well. I wrote that I was going to have the conversation at work, the real one, the one where I said, this is not the life I want to be building, and I think I've known that for a long time, and I think it's time to start building something else. I wrote out what that conversation would look like, what I would say, what I was afraid of, what I was prepared to lose. I didn't soften it. I let it be as large as it actually was. And I wrote one more thing, the hardest one, the one that cost the most. I stopped drawing at 9 years old because a moment of careless laughter taught me it was dangerous to make things and love them in public. I've spent 30 years treating that 9-year-old's decision as though it were wisdom. It wasn't wisdom. It was a wound that I mistook for a lesson, and I am not going to mistake it anymore. I don't know what it looks like yet to start again. I don't know if I'm any good. I don't know if it matters if I'm good. I know that I want to make something. I know that I've always wanted to make something. And I know that every year I wait is a year I don't get back. So, here, this is the beginning. The story doesn't end here, it starts. I wrote until the page was full, and then I closed the notebook, mine and the stranger's both, and I sat back and I felt something I'm going to try to describe accurately, because it deserves accuracy. It wasn't relief, it wasn't joy. It was closer to the feeling of setting something very heavy down after carrying it for such a long time that you'd forgotten it was there. A kind of full-body exhale, the muscles unclenching all at once. I didn't feel fixed. I felt like someone who had finally stopped pretending to be someone else. And those are very different things. But in that moment, the second one was enough. In that moment, the second one was everything. I sat at the kitchen table until well past midnight. I didn't feel the need to move. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't waiting for the next muffled, underwater day to begin. I was just there, present, mine. I want to be honest with you about what changed, what really changed. Because I've watched enough of these stories to know how they usually end, and I don't want to give you that ending, the triumphant montage, the version where everything resolves cleanly and the person arrives at the life they were always meant to have, and it's beautiful and uncomplicated and delivered like a gift. That's not what happened. Here is what actually happened. I messaged Daniel. He didn't reply for 11 days. When he did, it was short, 2 sentences. I appreciate this. I need more time. That was it. No reunion, no forgiveness extended like a hand across a table, just 2 sentences and more waiting, which is what I deserved, and which I'm sitting with the way you sit with things you can't resolve through effort, carefully, without rushing, hoping but not demanding. I had the conversation at work. It was uncomfortable in every way I'd imagined, and in several ways I hadn't. There were long pauses. There was a look across the desk that I recognized as disappointment, or maybe surprise. I stumbled over things. I was not eloquent. I was just honest, which turns out to be its own kind of eloquence even when it's awkward and incomplete. I gave 4 weeks' notice 3 days after that conversation. I don't have a new job. I have a plan, not a complete one, but a real one. I have enough savings for 6 months if I'm careful. I have a genuine, uncomplicated, terrifying amount of uncertainty ahead of me. And I have, for the first time in a decade, the feeling that I am moving towards something rather than away from it. I started drawing again. Badly, I want to be clear about this. I am extremely bad at it after 30 years of not doing it. My hands don't do what I asked them to do. The proportions are wrong. The horse I tried to draw looked like a particularly confused dog. But I kept the drawing. I put it on my fridge. I look at it every morning and I feel something I've decided to call pride, even though it's also technically embarrassing. The horse looked like a confused dog. I kept it anyway. I called it the beginning. I still don't know who the stranger was. I still can't explain the notebook, the precision of it, the things it knew, the way it seemed to track my present in real time. I've stopped trying to explain it. Some things are more useful as mysteries than as solved problems. What I know is that it found me when I needed to be found, and it gave me something I hadn't been able to give myself, the experience of seeing my own story clearly from the outside, without the editorial hand of my own self-protection shaping it. That's a rare thing. Most of us go whole lifetimes without getting it. I carry the notebook with me. Not everywhere, but I know where it is. Both of them. The stranger's and mine. I read them sometimes, side by side, the way you read 2 drafts of the same story, and I add to mine. Not daily. Sometimes I go weeks without writing, but I always come back to it. Because I've learned that the stories we tell about ourselves are not just descriptions of who we are. They are, in some essential and frightening way, instructions. And I've started writing mine differently. I am not the person I was on Monday before the stranger. I am not yet the person I think I can be. I am somewhere in the middle, moving, uncertain, drawing badly, waiting to hear from someone I hurt, building something without knowing if it will hold. It is the most alive I have felt in years. What would you do with a notebook? I've been thinking about you this whole time, not just in the abstract, in the specific. I've been thinking about the person watching this who has their own horse drawing they stopped making, their own Daniel they stopped calling, their own plan that became eventually and then became nothing. I don't think my story is unique. I think this particular kind of quiet giving up is one of the most common things in the world. I think most people are living some version of the life before the notebook, functional, reasonable, fine, and carrying the weight of the life they stopped believing they could have. So I want to ask you something directly, not rhetorically. I actually want to know. If a stranger handed you a notebook tomorrow, a notebook that knew everything, the things you've never said out loud, the moment you decided to become smaller, the person you stopped being and why, would you read it? All the way through? Even the pages that names the things you've worked hardest to forget? And if you read it, if you got to the blank pages at the end and you understood that they were waiting for you, what would you write? I'm asking because I think you already know. I think most people know. Somewhere beneath the management and the justification and the carefully maintained reasonableness, you know what the next true thing is. You know what you've been postponing. You know the name of the person you should call, the conversation you should have, the thing you should have never stopped making. The stranger found me on a Tuesday. I don't think you need a stranger. I think you need a blank page and enough courage to be honest with yourself for 1 full hour. That's it. That's the whole assignment. If this story landed somewhere real for you, subscribe, because this is what we do here. Every week, a story that goes somewhere worth going. And I need you to answer this in the comments. What's the page that would break you? What's the thing in your notebook that you've been most careful not to look at directly? You don't have to give me details. Just tell me it exists. Let's at least acknowledge it together. I read every comment, every one. See you there. If you're new here, hit subscribe right now, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell on this channel. And drop a comment.